And whereas, in recognition of a chapter in our nation's history that must never be forgotten, let us renew our sacred commitment to those who answered our country's call in Vietnam. May we remain thankful to those who fought in this conflict and honor their legacy of service. And whereas the freedoms and liberties we are blessed to enjoy are a direct result of the courage, devotion, and sacrifice of the members of our Armed Forces. Now therefore, be it proclaimed by the Pitt County Board of Commissioners the following. 1, that this board does hereby proclaim 2015, the year, as commemoration of Vietnam veterans on this 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. 2, it's further proclaimed that this board does hereby encourage all citizens to show honor and respect to our Vietnam War veterans, their families, and all who have served, realizing that it is never too late to pay tribute to the men and women who answer the call of duty with courage and valor. And number 3, it is further proclaimed that this proclamation be effective upon its adoption. It's adopted this 10th day of March in the year 2014, signed by Chairman Mark W. Owens and attested by the clerk, Kimberly W. Hines. Mr. Chairman.
Just pass that around. Gentlemen, as you view what has just been said here, and it's a small token of appreciation, the long overdue praise and thankfulness given to you for the service that you rendered to your country, to the people of this United States, and particularly for the people here of Pitt County. We never cease to be amazed and thankful for how great people are that give of their time and give of their effort and their lives for the benefit of liberty and for safety. And we truly thank you. And either one of you like to say anything now?
Yes, sir. On behalf of the Vietnam Veterans of America, I'm the president of the Vietnam Veterans of America here in Pitt County. We would like to give you our 50th anniversary pin to all the commissioners. And we really appreciate that you took your time out and you thought about the Vietnam veterans, because this is one generation there that never had a welcome. So we thank the commissioners, and we hope that Greenville there will become veteran friendly.
God bless you. Anybody else that would like to say anything? If not, we thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Come back. Come more often. We do not want to forget you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Glad to be here.
Good to see you. Thank you so much for coming.
All right, let's see who's next. Mr. Manager, you're ready for your next?
Yes, sir. The next item on the agenda is public addresses to the board. There's a few people signed up, and if I call your names, you'll come forward, please, and give us your name and address. Number 1, we have Beth Sanchez.
Good morning. Beth Sanchez. I live at 777 Maple Ridge Road in Greenville. I would like to address the third paragraph of the county staff analysis of my presentation. I quote, "Data as compiled utilized actual dog bite reports that had not previously been compiled by the county. It is acknowledged that the county has no other readily available data to either agree or disagree with the information presented. Admittedly, there is some concern that the data in some instances may have been extrapolated, making certain assumptions when there were holes in the data. However, even if the data was presented was 25% inflated hypothetically, there is still a very convincing case that Pitt County has animal control concerns, end quote. Since my presentation, I have not been contacted by county staff with any questions regarding my numbers, methodology, or the location of information. Luckily, I read online Friday afternoon that the canine control analysis was taking place today. Hopefully, I can clear up some of the questions that your staff may have had. In 2 specific locations, the bite data is readily available for your staff. The first location, excuse me, the hard copies, the bite report forms are located at the animal control shelter. If they had been hand counted, our numbers could have easily been compared. The second location, which I came upon after I had done all of my hand tabulation, are the electronic copies, which are located at pittcountync.gov, the Pitt County Annual Budget Summaries, which is compiled by this staff and signed by the county manager. On pages 3 and 6 of the handout I provided you is the compiled and published data by this county from 2008 to 2013. Highlighted in yellow are the animal bite investigations conducted by animal control. Located on these forms also are the target bite goals, highlighted in orange. 350 bites. That was the target goal for the last 2 years of this county, almost a bite a day. This year's goal is 270. Per the Daily Reflector, there had already been 53 reported animal bites by February 26 of this year. If you would turn to page 2, the 5-year animal bite totals from your own budget summaries are 1,471 bites. My bite totals, which represent only dog bites during that same time period, is 1,194. The 5-year difference between your numbers and my numbers, mine are 277 less, which makes sense because I did not include non-dog bites. The average 5-year difference between our numbers is 55.4 bites. In 2009, which I had access to this weekend on short notice, there were 53 non-dog bites. This is well within the average 5-year difference of 55 as stated above. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, staff stated that they had no readily available data to agree or disagree with my findings. Then on what grounds, I ask, could they assume that I inadvertently extrapolated any data, or why they felt the need to assume a hypothetical 25% inflation of bite numbers? The annual budget summaries before you, in your packet, do not support this. I know they did not count the bites in those totes in animal shelter because I have the year 2009 in my possession. Mr. Elliott, Mr. Holder, and Ms. Overton, when I read this part of your abstract on Friday, I asked, to what benefit did you think to myself that I would gain by inflating these numbers? That hypothetical 25% represents people, 329 Pitt County citizens who have been bitten. I cannot and will not, in good faith, allow the experiences of these citizens to be potentially discounted based on hypotheticals. Billy and I counted those forms meticulously, one by one, because they were not just pieces of paper to us. They were people, our neighbors. I have been forthcoming and open with all of my data. I have made myself available for any questions, and I will continue to do so. I hope that I have clarified the bite data in question. I do not want any shortcomings, Mr. Chairman, on my part to negatively impact a potential ordinance that will greatly improve the safety of so many citizens in this great county. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Just as a spokesman, I have not had any reservation. I have not had any reservation about the materials presented to you. And at your last presentation, I think you apprised that this board would take everything that you presented as you presented it. So if you've had any inference anywhere about non-validity of what you said, please wash that from your mind. This board is very thorough. This board will view every information that we have, whether it comes from the staff or whether it comes from you. And so the finality of it will be inclusive of what you presented to this board. All right, who's next?
Next, you have Billy Sanchez.
Billy Sanchez, 777 Maple Ridge Road. I'm currently treating an individual recovering from a stroke who lives in the county. On several occasions, home health personnel have been aggressively confronted by the neighbor's dog. On my first visit, I had to pull my car directly in front of the patient's ramp, wait about 10 minutes until the dog stopped circling and barking at my vehicle, and finally left the property where I could enter the home. On another occasion, the physical therapist walked up the ramp. The dog came out from beneath the ramp and lunged at him. The patient's son reports that one day the dog refused to move as he stood on his ramp, blocking his access to his own home. He stated, "I'll be damned if that dog's going to keep me out of my house." And as he tried to pass the dog lunged, thankfully only latching onto his pant leg before he kicked the dog, freeing himself. The patient and his son fear for the safety of themselves, visitors, and home health staff. Before the situation could possibly result in a bite and possibly result in a homebound individual actually being denied home health care secondary to safety concerns in the home, Pitt County Animal Control was contacted by Jason Adamski, physical therapist, on February 28th at 11:50 a.m. He left a message seeking assistance, leaving both the patient's number with his consent and his own personal phone number. Neither have received a return call from Pitt County Animal Control as of Sunday, March 9th. On page 8 of your handout, listed are the animal complaints over the last 5 years. On the county's budget reports, Animal Control lists only 26 nuisance complaints over that 5-year period. In the same period, the Sheriff's Department reported 724 filed reports and over 3,000 logged calls. Greenville Police, over 21,000 filed reports. On pages 9 to 12 in your handout, you'll find the nuisance complaint breakdown and the yearly targets located on Pitt County budget summaries. I ask, do these numbers make sense? Is the nuisance ordinance not enforceable or not being consistently enforced? One could make the argument that if a call is not answered, not followed up on, or answered with the all too familiar that dogs are allowed to roam, one could report an incredibly low number of animal nuisance complaints. Irregardless, as my personal example illustrates, the current response is grossly ineffective. We strongly recommend that all calls to Pitt County Animal Control be logged on an intake form and response documented. County staff now recommends that the proposed ordinance be referred to the Animal Control Advisory Board for review and input. If the board follows this recommendation, I ask the board to strongly consider appointing Captain Jim Marcel, Pitt County Sheriff's Office, whose deputies answer significant number of animal calls 24 hours a day, and also Officer Tim Langley, Greenville Animal Control Director, who currently enforces an animal control ordinance successfully in the city and whom the Animal Control Advisory Board reports accounts for 24% of the dog intakes at the shelter. I would also like for the board to strongly consider the possibility of the canine control ordinance, if passed, to be enforced by the Pitt County Sheriff's Department. And this is in reference to the Daily Reflector report this morning. If you cannot expand animal services due to the budget concerns to meet all needs, animal and people, I hope the focus of animal control is public safety in the services that you do provide. Lastly, the canine control ordinance written by staff includes in Section 5, Item G, the animal shelter microchipping all dogs who have been impounded at the owner's expense. One concern of citizens when we presented the proposed ordinance was that something would be added by the county that had not been presented. We will reserve judgment on this line item until staff presents what this entails, hopefully later this morning. This was not included in our proposal or discussed with any citizens in the county. We do not want this new inclusion to possibly disrupt or delay the passage of the canine control ordinance in this budget cycle. If microchipping becomes an issue with citizens, we ask that this item be removed as it does not directly impact public safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. All right, who's got next?
Next, we have Kristen Solomon.
Mr. Chairman, we'll be talking more about this later on, won't we?
That's correct.
Okay.
Hi there, my name is Christine Kelly Salomon. I live at 819 Driftwood Drive. I'm here today as a citizen who strongly supports the canine control ordinance as well as a dog lover and owner. Our goal with passing this bill, I thank you for writing it, getting it together, but the goal should be public safety, number one, and in order to enforce it properly. I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a common citizen, and when I look at page 1 of the proposed ordinance, I see a dog at large defined as a dog off the property of the owner. So my question is, does this exclude rented
Ma'am, could
property?
you speak closer to the mic?
Sure I
Yes.
can. Can you hear me okay?
Thank you.
Okay. Does this exclude rented property, leased property, or property that you have permission? For instance, my dog's allowed to run on the property that's behind my house. We have permission to be there. To avoid unnecessary calls by citizens who says, oh, I see a dog out in the neighborhood, it would be unnecessary if they knew that we had permission, and permission is part of this ordinance. On page 2, you'll see it says, a restrained dog is defined as a dog under the restraint within the meaning of this ordinance, controlled by means of chain, leash, or like device. I think we may need a little clarification. There was a court case in the Piedmont area that said, yes, this dog was on a leash, but it was not held by a responsible adult. So somebody that actually is controlling this animal appropriately. You know, not a child of 5 years old holding a Rottweiler, but an adult holding a dog on a leash. Because I can just put my dog on a leash and walk down the road and let it go. And my dog could attack somebody. So it's just a responsible adult holding that. And once again, I just really want to say that we would like to have a canine control ordinance. I have 2 shepherds that are owned by neighbors. They said they just can't afford the leashes. They don't want to really take the time to walk the dog, and the underground fences are too expensive. Those 2 German shepherds make everybody go inside their house. They just come right at us. They prevent the children from being walked around the neighborhood. 11 o'clock at night, as I'm walking home, the dogs came right at my car. I don't want to hit a dog. I mean, I just don't want to. I don't carry a gun. So I appreciate any help you can give us with this. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Who's next, Mr. Moon?
Next, we have Brenda Harris.
I'm Brenda Harris, and my address is on file. I'd like to tell you that Billy Sanchez helped my mom and dad. One day, my dad was at the mailbox, and a pit bull had cornered him. These things are things that you need to deal with, because the danger after something happens to a 90-year-old is not worth it. Now, the reason I came is, Mr. Hammond, I'm very sorry that the funeral home is in tax foreclosure now. Because you have to know, because it's your family, that it hurts. Everybody goes through hard times, but our tax collector, and we don't have open battles now. She treats me much better. But the real issue is that you said, if you tell me, Mr. Owens, we'll do something about it. But over and over again, and you folks are up for re-election, I've said, listen to the data, people. You don't know what you're doing. Money is missing, and you pick and choose who you select to go into tax foreclosure. The last time I checked, Mr. Hammond, your people had paid in 2010. There were many people that were put on the auction block before, but the influence of our county commissioners kept his family back. These things are wrong, and God in heaven will hold us responsible. I want to tell you that I've got the data, I've had the data, I keep the data current. That Pitt County, how you follow the in-rem foreclosure is one thing, but who you pick and choose to apply it to is how Pitt County is dishonest from the very word that the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title 6 and 7 stands for. You'd like to say, Brenda Harris, and as you attempted to say with this dog ordinance, these people did a wonderful job. You say, well, the data is not right. You said Mike Leach didn't give the right information. I'm here to tell you that man has a significant position with his company, and his data is excellent because I talked to him. He's a good man. When people in the community stand forward and they come before you, do you think we are not a target? Do you think that we don't understand there's a price to be paid? But the reason I came in January and prayed was because God in heaven is the one that changes the hearts of men. He changes the hearts of kings, and his word will never fail, and it will never return void. And when we pray for the blessings of the Lord, Commissioner Ward, I'll take you back to August 22nd, when you heard Scott Elliott say, we can't afford to collect from all the taxes. We have to go after the lowest hanging fruit. And then we call it case by case. I went to the state, and the state didn't say Brenda Harris was wrong. the state said we take no action, which was all I needed to bring the federal people in. I'm here to tell you, I appreciate the time because you gave others people's that. I appreciate the fact that on February the 10th, we were, as a state, under a food stamp. You get it right or your funds are gone, boys. And so we put the applications in and we said we made the deadline. I spoke to a federal lady that was not low on the food chain, and I said, ma'am, if you understand that North Carolina don't play it straight, and our counties don't play it straight because they tell you what you want to hear. But the truth of the matter is that the DSS is in severe violation of the compliance agreements today. Limited English-speaking people have many babies. I'm not opposed to folks that come from other countries and migrate to our great nation. But I am opposed to when the rules change, because if there's 4 or 5 babies and they can't remember who fathered them, and we chase American boys and send them to jail if they don't pay child support, then we have a double standard. If a person's declared indigent because they receive food stamps and Medicaid in fraud because they don't disclose whose shoes sleeps under their bed at night, I am a witness because I turned in several of the people in my homes that I knew that the income was a fraud. I knew who slept in their bed and who fathered their babies. What I'm saying to you is you are on the verge of losing all your federal funds. And you need to take real consideration because facts don't lie, people do. So when you look at where we are as a community, you need to start listening to the citizen, because we don't come not knowing that we are doing a hard thing. When we represent the people, we know that our lives and our reputations and everything are on attack. But in closing, I'd like to tell you, each one of you are doing your meet and greets, and I want to represent this district. But if you don't call the meetings that we've asked for, don't ask for the citizens to vote this time, because the lawsuits will layer now, because we waited until the time that it would affect this board the most. If you're not willing to stand for the nation and the county and those principles of God, then don't claim them in the church, folks, because in these last days...
That's bad enough, Ms. Harris.
Okay, in these last days, people, we're going to be accountable for where we are and what we are. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. All right.
Mr. Chairman, that's all we have.
Okay, let's now move on to Dwayne. I believe you're next.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. The next item on your agenda is the January 31st, 2014 monthly financial reports for the general fund. This report represents 58.33% of our fiscal year. One thing I will note is that if you take note of your budget, it does appear to have grown somewhat. That is somewhat of an anomaly in that this is the first report that includes the $114 million budget amendment that was made to account for the revenue anticipation note and the subsequent sale of the escrow securities that was added to our budget. When I made adjustment for those items to prepare some straight line comparison with prior fiscal year, our revenues have been collected at a rate of 69.16%, and general fund expenditures have been spent at a rate of 55.49%. Year-to-date as of January 2014 compared to 2013 puts us right at almost 200,000 above where we were at this point through the end of January last fiscal year. So current year continues to track favorably in comparison with the prior year financial performance.
Do we have a motion for this?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the report.
All right, let's vote. Thank you, Ron. Okay, Ms. Booker, I believe you're next.
Vote David. David. Vote yes. Vote.
Good morning.
Good morning.
The Pitt County fiscal year-to-date combined collection rate for real and personal property as well as registered motor vehicles is 95.33, an increase as compared to the rate 1 year ago of 94.24. Pitt County Tax Administration continues to pursue all outstanding taxes using the necessary enforcements remedies available through the North Carolina General Statutes.
Have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm gonna ask a question.
Go ahead, Mr. James.
On your license plate taxes,
Yes.
as you know, the new law was passed, and of course, we now pay different. Have you got a record as to what we're getting now as to what we got before?
Yes, I do not have those with me, but we keep a total.
I'm
A
sure
running
that you do.
total.
The next time you come, kind of fill us in as to how much money. I know we're supposed to be getting additional money, but how much money are we getting more than we did in the past? I would certainly like to come in.
Let's do that, thank you.
Would appreciate that very much.
Okay. Mr. Manager?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just a few things briefly. Next meeting dates, March 24th at 6 p.m., then your April meeting will be April 7th at 9 a.m. Last week, the NACO conference, which is the National Association of Counties Legislative Conference, was held in Washington, D.C. I know that obviously Vice Chairman Webb and Commissioner McLaughlin attended along with our county attorney. I believe the county attorneys was going to offer a recap of the conference, and then if commissioners have any comments as well.
We had a very successful NACO conference in Washington, D.C. last week. There were very valuable education sessions. We attended sessions related to leadership skills, immigration, Supreme Court review, and climate control, to name a few. There were several others. We had some very engaging speakers in our speaker list. One of the most impressive to me was Sally Jewell, the Secretary of the Department of the Interior, who spoke to us. We heard from our own Anthony Fox, North Carolina native, who now heads up the Department of Transportation. We heard from a group called No Labels, speaking to the group about how to problem solve without regard to labels of Democrat or Republican. Very engaging speakers. And then I think what is often most important to us here back at home is that we did have visits despite the bad weather. We could not meet with all of our elected officials, but I did meet with each office, Senator Hagan, Senator Burr, Representative Jones, and Butterfield's staff members to share the legislative goals at the federal level that this board adopted last month. Had good conversation with those staff members and found it to be a very productive conference.
Melvin,
Yeah, I like to echo what our attorney said, but it was over 1,500 attendees there, and they talked a lot about the Affordable Care, the pros and cons about that act. Talked about the connectivity of the broadband in rural communities, how to make sure that our rural counties are access to broadband, and also the PREA, which is the Prison Rape Elimination Act. This is a national movement in terms of prisoners or inmates having rights from being raped or being sexually harassed in prison. This is something that is even down to the jails here in all counties. And they talked about how to deal effectively with that. I thought, for the most part, as our attorney had mentioned, it was a very well-attended program considering the snow that we encountered. But the conference was well attended, and I thought it was very well, information was very well given. Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I attended the Justice and Public Safety Committee meetings that I'm a member of, as well as the subsequent subcommittees. Some of the issues that we discussed were Biggert's water. That's an issue in Congress right now, trying to mitigate flood insurance costs for especially people in our area. We're going to see an increase in that, and we're trying to keep that to where it doesn't affect rural counties and counties that aren't on the coast as much. We also talked about mental health money for transitioning people from incarceration to treatment. We have a lot of people. It's estimated 24% of the people, the 10 million people that enter into county jails each year, have some sort of behavioral issue. And if we can get them plugged into treatment, maybe we can keep them from committing these petty crimes. We're not talking about violent criminals, we're talking about just someone who might steal something small that has these issues. And also, one of the better things that I thought that we were given, and is NACO is doing now, is called County Tracker. And if you can see here for the folks that are here, you can go to that and click on any county in the nation, and it'll give you different numbers about our economic recovery. And if you look at Pitt counties, we're actually outpacing the state of North Carolina in almost every category, with the exception of home prices. Although we're trending in the same direction, our home prices had a different value than most at the beginning. But as far as job growth, our unemployment rate, and our economic growth output, as well as our GDP, we're outpacing most counties in the state. So I was proud of that and glad to see that tool available to us, provided by NACO.
Thank you. Any remarks by anybody else regarding that? If not, do we have a motion for the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
May I ask one question again?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
You see down there, storm water. And I wonder how many county commissioners know how much money it's brought from taxpayers on storm water. I kind of got involved in it with the airport. The amount of money that is paid in. This money, as you build a building, build a business, you have that added on to your property, what you pay. And it is a tremendous amount of money. All right, James, of course, I really want you to ask you a question or two. And when I talked to you about the storm water, of course, for the airport, and that involves this board, by the way, very much. What did you, I know we found out, of course, that there was a drainage district going across there. Could you fill the board in pertaining to that?
Mr. James, we've done limited review of that information. I think we've provided a few maps showing the extent of even the new runways and areas that are being incorporated into the airport property. But we've just shown the blue line streams and how the stormwater is being released from that site. So we've not done an in-depth analysis by any means.
So you haven't, have you talked to Jerry pertaining to what we do know and about what is already being paid into the drainage tax?
I have not spoke with him particularly. I provided those maps, but I have not had a conversation.
Haven't followed up on the
No,
maps.
sir.
I will do that. All right, and you know what I'm talking about, of course.
Yes, sir.
And there are maps in Pitt County. Mr. Chairman, I know you kind of want to know more about it too because of your drainage taxes and so forth, that each person has to pay, especially in rural Pitt County as well as the city of Greenville. Such as Commissioner Garris out there, I believe yours is the Chicago Creek Watershed Project, that those people are taxed throughout. And we're the same way. And so many people don't realize that. But James, I would appreciate, and you can't be taxed, it's fixed some kind of way. How is that law fixed, James?
Mr. James, let's let Mr. Rhodes get you that report. And bring
Okay,
it
we'll
back
do
to
that. But I'll talk to you. I thought maybe some of you might want to know more
Well, we
about
do,
it.
but he does not have his material
Okay.
with him, so he
All
can
right,
get it
that'll
for
be
you.
fine, James. I'll talk to you about it later.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. All right. Anything further on this?
No, sir.
Mr. James, anything further on that?
No, that's all.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Ellis.
All right, consent agenda, has that been voted on?
We've
Madam
already
Clerk?
got that.
All right, items for decision. Your first item is your assessment policy for subdivision street improvements. This is, James Rhodes can handle this. This deals with some amendments that were discussed in a prior meeting.
Good morning again. This discussion's in response to Mr. Bobby Hardison coming before the board at last month's February 3rd meeting. And this is concerning, of course, your existing policy on the assessment for street improvements in particular subdivisions. And these are only for those roads that are intended to be maintained by NCDOT in the future. So they're proposed public streets. And they're designated once these plans are recorded as dedicated public rights-of-way. With that, first I'd like to just share some highlights from your existing policy. This was adopted last summer in July, and it's based on provisions in a specific general statute, 153A, Article 9, And again, it's designed to assist those property owners within a subdivision to have their streets meet DOT standards. We do have a subdivision ordinance. You may recall we also had a joint venture as we were working on this particular issue in ensuring that future subdivisions, we have a financial guarantee collected here at the county level to ensure this doesn't happen further in the future. So these are existing subdivisions that for whatever reason may have fallen into disrepair, and in turn the property owners are seeking assistance through the county. One thing that we did decide on when the policy was adopted was that we would look at each lot or each property owner being assessed an equal amount. As you know, in some of these subdivisions, the lots may range from a half an acre up to 3 or 4 acres. The general statutes allow certain ways of assessing these properties. You could base it off size of lots, property values, a number of different ways. The board did decide to assess each lot equally. The general statute also limits the amount of the repayment term to not more than 10 years. As Mr. Hardison mentioned in his comments last month, there is some trepidation by the property owners as far as signing the petitions that are required. Remember, at least 75% of the landowners have to sign the petition before it's brought back to the board for consideration. They wanted to know more about the repayment term, administrative charges that could be levied, and also if there would be an interest rate. So with all that said, staff has met. This is tax office staff, county manager's office, legal and planning, to discuss some of these items. And what our recommendations are, and they're included in your package today. First, we do feel there should be some administrative expenses that are acknowledged through this process. Our legal staff has worked up a rough estimate on that, and we're looking at about $5,000 per occurrence, or each time these roads are brought through a petition process, about $5,000 levied as part of that assessment when we actually go through the calculation. We're recommending that no interest rate be applied, and also, this is the tricky part, and we'll go through an example in just a minute, that the repayment term should be determined by attempting to not more than double the annual taxes levied by the county on a particular property. So, your example for today would be, this is somewhat mimicked after the Mayfield subdivision, not exactly but close. Take an example, 20 lots within the subdivision. Property values, for simplicity's sake, we just said $150,000. Street improvement cost, $95,000 overall for this particular street. Administrative charges, about $5,000. So you're looking at about $100,000 in totality for all the property owners to share in. This would be at $5,000 per lot owner. So with that, with your $150,000 value on the lot, your annual taxes would be assessed at a little bit better than $1,000 per year, and that's based on the current valuation or current tax rate for that valuation. We're looking at not exceeding about $1,000 per year. So with this, each lot owner is responsible for $5,000, $1,000 per year over a 5-year term. Also, you still have that area. You can go up to 10 years. So this is just an example again. Your 5-year repayment term would be $1,000 and could be reduced further if you extended that term all the way to 10 years, actually cutting it in half as an annual assessment to $500, and you can see the range in between there. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we are recommending that you consider these amendments to this resolution today as far as your policy, and that includes the interest rate, the repayment term, and some way of actually instilling in all these variables that you're considering, attempting not to more than double the affected property owners' taxes per year. Remember, you're dealing with a number of variables, depending on property values, depending on the amount of money that's necessary. You can have a wide range of possibilities here, so this is but one example.
All right, Beth. Dennis, James.
I would like to say that we've had this information and we've had an opportunity to look at it and ask some questions. This was based on a request by the gentleman who has been working hard on this. I'm afraid that if we don't go on and move on it, I think you've given us some good information, which is what we asked. And I think that the people who had signed previously, who still had some questions, I think we needed to answer them, and I think we did. So I'd like to make a motion that we accept this so they can get on with the repairs.
Is there a second?
Second.
Now, Mr. James and then Tom.
I have several questions. Of course, I'm going to support doing whatever we can to help them because they need our help. You said that each lot was $5,000.
In this example.
In this, all right, but then you said it would take 10 years at $1,000 per lot.
No, sir.
That's what I wanted to get clear in my mind now.
5 years.
That would be $1,000 for
Per year.
5 years. 5 years.
All right, it's gonna be, all right, now, did you, I've been involved in some of this before. We had an opportunity to pay it all up front and not pay any taxes, and you've got some people out there, I'm sure, that will do this. They will pay it all up front at one time. Have you got it worked out for those people that they are able to do this?
Yes, sir.
How much money would they save then if they did this way? I haven't heard that in the report.
We're looking at running it, and I'm glad we still have the tax administrator here. We're looking at running this very along the same lines as our other taxes, and there would be that annual 2% decrease in the overall. That one time, if you pay up front, you would get that reduction. That is
All
what
right,
we're
so
looking
you
at.
can't tell me if I own this property now, how much if I paid a one-time payment? Because as I said, James, a lot of people, the chances are, will choose to do this. Especially the elderly people, if they are able to take it to do it. All right, choice to pay 20. How many lots are there, James? You mentioned the word 20, but is that just a
This
figure
is an
you gave?
example, kind of mirrored after Mayfield subdivision. In that particular one, it might be 21 or 22 lots.
Well, it's not as much, so that would be 20.
That would actually reduce the amount.
Uh-huh. I have no other problem. I support it very strongly, Mr. Owens.
The only question I have is, your example doesn't talk about interest. Is this interest-free?
Yes.
Yes, I did
Good.
mention
All right.
that, actually. We would not include
I have no
interest.
other questions.
Mr. Gash.
Thank you.
In this motion, are we just approving the process, or approving the procedure, or are we specifically approving the action to Mayfield? And if we are, okay, so let me ask you one other question then. Will it come back to us to approve the process for Mayfield?
Absolutely.
And at that point in time, we will make a decision whether we want to go 10 years or 5 years?
Yes, sir. This
Okay,
is
thank
but
you.
an example, and your legal staff can tell you there's a long, very grueling process of public hearings and other notices that have to be taken care of.
It was my understanding when I made the motion that we have to get the signatures, the percentage of signatures. So that's
correct.
what this motion allows, and hopefully it'll move at a quick pace. So it'll come back to us and we can then vote on what you were speaking to.
And of course, I understood that, but I was wondering if the Mayfield residents wanted to know up front whether they were going to be looking at $1,000 a year or $500 a year. The length of time determines that.
They do that. They need to do that.
And what we've done, again, this gives some better guidelines, and that's what we're hearing from not only Mayfield, but another subdivision that's also seeking this assistance, is that they just want to have a better understanding about what that term may be. Right now, it's wide open.
Any further discussion on this motion? If not, let's vote. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Elliott, I believe you're next.
Yes, sir. Next item on page 42, actually page 47, is a request by the Board of Education. They've got a cell tower they're trying to place on the CMF's middle school site, and the Board of County Commissioners are being asked to consider your right of first refusal on the site because they're entering into a long-term lease. There is a representative from the school system here if you'd like to come forward, Mr. Chairman, and speak.
Board have any questions on this?
This is just a regular, I mean, this we have to do in all
First
cases
refusal
when.
where you want to
Yes,
get into it.
exactly.
How
So I
much-
don't have a question.
I have a question. How much money are we talking about?
The lease agreement right now that they're proposing to us is $100,000 upfront money, $1,500 a month after that for 5-year term. It will increase 5% for each 5-year term beyond that.
And the Board of Education would get all of these funds, I
Yes,
assume.
sir.
This is the one that we voted some years ago out there.
This is
On this site.
a second cell tower site on this site on
Or
there.
it's gonna be another one.
Correct.
That we'll give him permission.
You are not necessarily giving permission. You're saying that the Pitt County Board of Commissioners has no interest in acquiring the property before it's sold or entered into a long-term lease with this cell tower company.
But do we, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Manager, I think that's your call pertaining to that and for the future of Pitt County, and it's what we have in line for that.
My recommendation in the comments was that to allow the Board of Education to enter into this and not to exercise your first right of refusal.
If there's no other discussion, I'd like to make a motion that we allow this to take
Second.
place.
Is there, now, Dr. Johnson?
Yes, I need to abstain because my son originally proposed the.
All right, very good, that's well taken. Anybody else? Reverend Hammond, did you want to say something?
I want to ask the question, Mr.
Well,
Chairman.
answer it. Ask
Has
it.
it already been predetermined that the Board of Education will receive these funds?
They get it.
No, sir. If I can answer for the presenter, until the lease is entered into either by the Board of Education or if the Pitt County opted to purchase a site and then have the cell tower site on there, I would think in the end, the Board of Education would probably look to the county to provide that revenue and current expense. Whether you would do it or not would be another day for a debate, but this will be additional money for the school system to have to use for operating expenses, which would hopefully defray additional appropriations of county tax dollars for that purpose. So in some respects, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another.
You ready to vote?
I want to ask one more question. All right, when did we donate that land? I remember about the cell tower. When did we donate that land? I thought that land belonged to the county of Pitt and was never given to the Board of Education. When did that happen?
The Board of Education holds title to all of the school properties except for those properties that we have a bond or loan on. And once they're paid off, they are then deeded back to the Board of Education. There is one cell tower site on that location near the baseball field.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, Ms. Gallagher, the existing cell tower site, or maybe you can tell me, is there a long-term lease on that?
There is a long-term lease.
Okay. That may have been what came before the county at the point in time that, in a like situation.
But the county can use this like we're having problems with the fire department. The county, are we able to use these sites the cell tower themselves?
We're not a party to this agreement. This would be an agreement between the Board of Education and the cell tower company.
All right, have we voted? Everybody voted? Okay, next order of business is the number 3 under item for decision. Let's see, Dwayne or Scott, who is the presenter here?
I'll kick this off, if I may, Mr. Chairman, and staff may come to assist. This is on page 52 of your agenda package. This is a follow-up to your last meeting on February 17th. And I'd like to run through the summary of information first. Would like the county attorney to briefly go through the ordinance. And I guess if I may start off just by saying that, as I say in the abstract, a very compelling case was made for the information on dog bite information. I do want to say that I regret if any comments that were made in this abstract that were perceived as to diminish the overall impact on the data displayed. I think the abstract speaks for itself, that it really did affirm what was being presented. In terms of the two data sets, there is a difference of 18, almost 19% in between the two data sets. Yes, they are county numbers, but there is admittedly a difference. That still does not diminish in any respect the need for consideration of this type of ordinance. So again, this is a follow-up to the last meeting and the board's motion on that. The staff did not have time to recompile all the information that was provided in the presentation by Mr. and Mrs. Sanchez. We did take the information, and we do realize that over the years, the county has had different formats in collecting the data. We have not compiled it, and that is admittedly, that's probably obviously a fault of our own, but because we have changed the form through the years, the thought was there may be some inconsistencies in which the data had been reported by citizens for the dog bite information. In the abstract, you've got the current 3 ordinances that are on the books with a brief summary of each. First one being the animal cruelty and neglect ordinance, second being the animal nuisance ordinance, the third one being the dangerous dog ordinance. You also have the proposed canine control ordinance that has been put together by staff, primarily based upon the discussion and information from the February 17th meeting. Not that it was made 100% exclusively in that presentation, but also based upon what staff felt was needed in the ordinance, and also based upon our analysis and basing this off of another county in North Carolina. So with that, I'm going to ask Janice to go to the ordinance, but before I do that, on the bottom of page 54, in terms of budget considerations, did want to just outline those real quickly. We are still vetting different budget scenarios with the canine control ordinance. We do have information that we have, that's very preliminary, that we have compiled, but thought it was premature to put all that on the table before you today. I think you need to get your hands around the ordinance language first and then go from there. Some of the issues that are still incomplete that are being vetted by staff are facility or capital needs. Can we expand the existing shelter? Can we, or do we need to build an entirely new shelter on a different location? Operational needs in terms of additional staff that could to handle the control aspects of the new ordinance. Also looking at our capacity limits as to exactly what can we do on a urban versus or incorporated versus non-incorporated animal control holding of animals. Revenue needs, obviously revenue sources need to be identified. There was some preliminary discussion of this between the joint meeting of the Board of Commissioners and Animal Control Advisory Board, and staff has done even some additional look on that since the last meeting, since the scope of the what has been considered is far expanded from the joint meeting earlier in the year. And the last item would be any opportunities to partner or outsource a function or functions of the current shelter operations, that primarily being probably the adoption of adoptable animals, as we more closely would be having an emphasis on control. Not to say we could not do both, but if we could find a cost-effective manner to outsource, that is something we could consider. And some very informal conversations have occurred on that basis, just to do some exploratory, especially as we march towards budget very quickly, to see if that would be a benefit to the county. Then you have the recommendation in there, but I think prior to that, if the attorney will just run through the ordinance real quick, proposed ordinance.
Yes, and very briefly, you have the ordinance in your agenda package. It's the proposed draft ordinance number 4. In the beginning, it sets forth in your whereas paragraphs how we got to this point, and the continuing concerns were public safety. To set forth your tone in that manner, Section 1 discusses your authority to do this, which is how we start every ordinance. It's followed by a section of definitions that are terms that are referred to within the ordinance itself. With regard to territorial application, this ordinance would be effective in the unincorporated areas of Pitt County, which is how your ordinances are. If a municipality wanted to adopt this ordinance, they would need to do so by an affirmative resolution. And that would involve further discussions, but as it's written, it applies only to the unincorporated parts of Pitt County. Section 4 clearly excludes all hunting dogs. That was an important aspect of this from the beginning of the discussions, and that's repeated also in Section 5, but has made its own section to eliminate any doubt. Section 5 is essentially the meat of this ordinance, where it makes it unlawful for an animal to be at large. There are some exceptions carved out below that as it relates to hunting, dog shows, or other areas. We also took some language from Wake County's ordinance that we thought would also be applicable here, and it specifically relates to dogs in parks. And we do also talk about what it means to be on a leash in that section and also in the definitions. It does create a scheme of penalties with a first, second, and third violation of $50, $100, and $250, including the reclamation fees and any boarding fees. The penalties would be payable within 72 hours, and reclamation is required within 72 hours. We use that 72-hour time frame because that's consistent with the North Carolina General Statutes period of time for holding animals that are picked up. And then Section 6 gives the Animal Control Department the authority to pick up that dog who was in violation of this ordinance. That's authority that they don't currently have today. Section 7 lays out the redemption. When we drafted the ordinance, we tried to keep in mind some practical considerations for the Animal Control Department with regard to redemption notice, time limits, and penalties. And then Section 8 has to do with the enforcement. Section 9 is your effective date, and that can be filled in at the time the board further considers and/or adopts this ordinance. It is a first draft. Our attempt was to bring to you an ordinance that mirrors the format of your other ordinance, just taking the substance of what was prepared by the Sanchez's. It does include, for example, and I know it was referenced in the public addresses to the board this morning, a provision on microchipping. That does not make or break this ordinance, but it's something for you to consider. In looking forward, we wanted to make enforcement as clean as possible. A microchip, as I understand from the shelter, is about $10, so that if any dog passing through the shelter could be microchipped by animal staff on their way out at such a minimal cost, that would help us identify these dogs in the future if they are reclaimed by their owner. That was the thinking behind that. Again, it's not necessarily geared towards the public safety aspect, but we throw that out there for your consideration. We also thought it was better to put it in for your consideration, and then you could eliminate it versus having missed it altogether. With that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but it's a first draft for your consideration, and I'm happy to hear your feedback.
Any questions? Tom? Then Mr. James?
One of the things I think you need to actually do is to define control for us. In here, it talks about being restrained by a leash or equivalent. But could voice control be considered something that a person could actually do, or some other mechanism? And then, well, just
answer that
put,
question
you
first.
don't need to, this is rhetorical, you don't need to answer it today because you may not be prepared. If you want to, you can, but I got another question if you want to say anything.
Okay. In response to that, we did consider whether or not voice control was sufficient. The way this is worded, it does not include voice control within control unless you're on your own property, in which case it doesn't matter. So in other words, you may voice control your animal on your own property. This only impacts dogs that are off of their property.
But what if they are on, let's say they're on a farm and they have permission to be there, and they're not a hunting dog, and a person does have control of voice control of a dog? That would not be me. My dog is very spoiled. But that's why I have a fence in the backyard. But what about in a situation like that?
In a situation like that, I think it would be very unlikely that there would be a call then for that animal to be considered a roaming animal. If you're within, and this is kind of the discussion we had as we drafted this. If your dog is within your voice control, you are likely within earshot of that dog, because voice control, the dog would need to hear you. And so that would not likely be a dog that would be called to be picked up as roaming at large. We could certainly make the ordinance more explicit if we needed to. We did not, because we didn't think that situation would be as likely. We also addressed it after the penalties. There is a section under Section 6 under impoundment that says if the dog is found running at large and the owner is there, has been verified, promptly and properly restrains that dog, then there may be a written warning issued versus a monetary penalty. And so this ordinance was not intended to hamper or really impede the responsible dog owner who was present with their dog on property with permission or somewhere in the public. This is intended really from the public safety perspective to address those dogs that are roaming at large without a responsible pet owner anywhere nearby who are threatening to other people.
But because it does not specifically use the word voice commandings or whatever, that's where I have a problem with it, because you can't enforce something that's not actually in the ordinance. So I'd like that to be considered. The other thing I'd like to talk about, the microchip, as a separate issue to all of this. I think that all dogs, regardless of size or breed, should be microchipped. I think we need to have that as something that we as a county force owners to have for a couple of reasons. One, everybody's favorite radio station is WIIFM. What's in it for me? It's a very small charge, $10. Even if you inflate that a little bit, then that would be, for the service that was actually rendered. They would get some value for it. That if their dog was lost, they would have a better chance of reclaiming them. And I think the ordinance also needs to have something in it, or maybe our animal control system needs to have something to where the different places that hold the dogs that are captured for whatever reason, they communicate with each other, so that if a dog is picked up by the city of Greenville and it got away from somebody in the county, they'd be able to reclaim it, more easily. And then the third thing is that there's at least one incident where I know that a person was bit by a dog, and everybody knew who owned that dog. But when they went to talk to the owner of that dog, the owner, wasn't my dog. If it had been microchipped, there wouldn't have been that. Wasn't my dog. Again, it gets back to people being held responsible. It's a shame that we have to have laws and ordinances and pass things that force people to be responsible. But it would be my contention that the microchip would go a long way in being able to identify, to eliminate some of the problems we have.
That it, Tom?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
At least for now.
Yes, I have several questions. Number one, why wasn't Belp and them invited to participate in making this ordinance? Because they are the ones that did it, and they are the ones that, and I thought we had that understood, that they would be put on that committee to help in the writing of it.
Mr. James, we didn't have a committee per se. From the motion itself, staff was directed to draft the ordinance and bring it back to you.
That's true.
Obviously, we used the input from the citizen presentation and to bring it back to you with the thought that this was a draft ordinance. There would be plenty of time for citizen input, as well as if you were to adopt the motion as recommended, the Animal Control Advisory Board would have review and input as well. This was not meant to be an ordinance that would come back today and be adopted and be a closed, done deal.
No, but these people have done all of this work, and yet, from what she said, were never even contacted. That tells me something. You know what it tells me, don't you? This is government. All right, but that's what, we won't go there. And the Chip concerned what Tom has said. I think it has to be done, because people are not going to claim their dog, especially if it's done something wrong. We're that way. And it's the easiest, it's the best $10 we can spend. If they don't have it, that dog ought to be labored. I really think so. And if we're going to do it, and if we're going to do it right, when that dog comes through that animal shelter, it needs to be identified. And the only way you're going to identify that dog is by a tag. That's the only way. And so you might as well figure that in on it. I have some questions, of course, pertaining to it. And that is, when it comes in, and you might as well face it. I went on down here in one section here. If suppose a dog bites somebody, then how is that dog gonna be labeled? Or is that dog gonna turn him loose, let him go again, let him bite somebody else? Or is that dog gonna be labeled?
Mr. James, you would still have your dangerous dog ordinance. The first three ordinances I referenced would still be in the books. Eventually, I would envision you would take all four of these ordinances and codify them into one comprehensive ordinance.
See, this is the reason I told you in the beginning when we talked about it before. Once you open something up, there is no end in this to where it will go. And I knew that. Well, I'm kind of dumb in some respects, but I know when we get out something, we want to continue on it, Mr. Manager.
Mr. James, we debated bringing back a comprehensive ordinance, but thought the board really needed to take this one bite at a time. In terms of involving so many people in it, we're just trying to keep it simple and trying to bring it back to the board so that you can then make the decision of who, what, how, where, and when you want to go the next step.
I guess what I'm so concerned is all these people came up to the last meeting, they came before us, they voiced their opinion, and what have we done about it? I guess that's what I'm really concerned about, Mr. Manager.
Well, I guess I would say within a 2-week period of time, we have drafted a draft ordinance, brought it back to you, which in our opinion meets the needs of canine control in Pitt County. Now the next step will be to determine how you want public input or animal control board input or input otherwise into this process. But within a 2-week period, I think we've very quickly brought back to you an ordinance that meets what you asked for.
I'm looking forward to how long it's going to take this board to take actions on what has been requested. I really am, Mr. Manager. And are we going to continue? But I think, well, I've got several things that I've already talked too much this morning, but we've got, and what really kind of concerns me as I look at this board, how many are here that live in rural Pitt County? See, that's the thing. This is a very important thing. Most of Pitt County are already under a dog ordinance. You realize that. Already have a dog ordinance written and in control. And their dogs are still biting. Therefore, something is not working. I don't know what it is. I don't have the answer to it. But I know by us just talking about it, it's not going to do. And I know to make it work, we're going to have to pass one as strong as we can. And then as we see that things are not right, we need to have enough gall in us to take and to correct it and make sure that it is right. I think that very strongly, because we're not going to get it right the very first time. But I don't think, too, now, we have a good group that works with the dog, with dogs and animals in our animal shelter. But at the same time, you got to have that every citizen on there that takes their time to take and to get in there and spend their time to make things better for the citizens of Pitt County. And how many are on that committee that live in rural Pitt County, I wonder? All of them, I hope.
What do you call rural? Because
not resident, not
okay,
already.
Here's my point.
In the city, not already in the city, or one city or town. That's what I'm talking about.
But I'm in an ETJ, and we call ourselves nowhere
Well,
land.
you're about right.
Because we might as well be rural, because the city doesn't do anything except give us.
All right, that's a question that right there I had wanted to answer. Yes. When you're in the ETJ, you're under the planning department of the city of Greenville or Aden or Winterville or wherever it might be. I know that. Now, are you under the same laws as far as animals are concerned? Who picks up the animals if you call them if you're in the ETJ?
No, sir. My understanding is ETJ would only be for zoning, subdivision, and building inspections, not animal control.
So therefore, you can call me rural.
I do. That's what I wanted to know. All right, now, in other words, under the ETJ, they're not treated the same then on planning and so forth. I want your opinion, our attorney.
To the same question?
Yes.
Yes, I agree that in the extraterritorial jurisdiction, only the planning and zoning and inspection services are provided, and that this ordinance as proposed would apply for canine control in the ETJ. I'm understanding your question correctly. I agree with the manager.
So your question was, how many on this board live in an ETJ
Yeah,
or
well, we won't go there because you represent all of Pitt County. I know that, and that's the good thing about it.
Gene?
Yes.
let me answer one quick. It doesn't make no difference where you or Tom lives.
Oh, I
whether
know
it's
that.
EK, city, or whatever. The problem is the safety problem that we have about dogs biting children and adults.
Right.
We've asked the staff to come back and bring us a working form. They came back and showed you ordinance 1, ordinance 2, ordinance 3, and ordinance 4.
Yeah.
If you want to add another one to that, you had a state law
Right.
prior to that. But I'm of the opinion that you need to take all these and put it into one inclusive ordinance to take care of the safety of the people as it pertains to roaming dogs and wild dogs. One more thing, and then I'll stop too, but you want to know why these haven't been enforced. It's very simple. We have not provided enough money to the sheriff or to the city, whoever the financing people are, to implement these. These ordinances have been on the books, but it's not been perpetuated. We've not given the money to go out and to take care of it. That's where we've got to do. Give them the money to do that with, and maybe this problem will be solved.
Right, and I realize too, and that's what I wanted to bring out. You've got dog bites in the city of Greenville, a lot of them. So we've got to be able to control that. Now, you can't tell me anything about the dog ordinance. I've had traps brought out. I've set them on my land to take and to catch the doggone dogs, and it's almost impossible. But let me tell you all this: whenever you catch one in that trap, he ought to be gotten immediately. He don't need to stay there 24 hours, and you know it, and I know it.
All right, let's go around a little more. I believe we've got some more people that wants to talk about this. Glenn.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Then Dr. Johnson, then Ms. Ward, then Jimmy Garris.
Mr. James, I don't think anyone pretends that the ordinance will stop dog bites. We just want to be able to reduce them. You know, people are going to get bit by their pets. They're still going to be at-large dogs. The point is to give us, the animal control, the authority to pick up those dogs that they don't currently have. But what we also have to do is make sure that we're committed to not just passing an ordinance to feel good about an ordinance, but to pass an ordinance and be prepared to fund the other end of it. I haven't heard anything about how much it's going to cost yet. And this is under items for decision. Are we deciding on this today?
The motion is to a referral, referring it to the Animal Control Advisory Board for review and input, and then to bring it back to you during the budget workshops for consideration for implementation.
Because that's going to be one of the biggest factors is what we're willing to do to fund it. We're going to have to expand the shelter. We're going to have to expand how many animal control officers we have. I think it's going to cost somewhere over $30,000-$40,000 just to outfit an officer, not including their salary, benefits, and everything that comes along with being an employee. A radio itself is $5,000. So, I mean, we got just be prepared for the funding.
The sheriff's department's
You're talking about spending money earlier. Just remember, you're going to be spending money. No, the sheriff's department doesn't. They're not going to be able to pick up dogs.
Who's going? These hunters or any landowners going to get the sheriff? Because there's going to be trouble between everyone who owns that dog and the sheriff's not going to be.
The sheriff's not going to be able to pick the dogs up. They're not going to pick.
They pick the individual up. Go to Edgecombe County and see what happens. They haven't had to do it but just a few times.
Let him finish, Mr. James.
All right, but I'm telling me.
Did you finish?
No, well, this.
Go ahead. How about you finish?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This isn't Edgecombe County. I can tell you here, the sheriff isn't going to have time to pick up. Based on call volume, they're just not going to have time to pick up dogs. They're not going to put catch sticks in every car. So we need to make sure that we outfit our properly trained ACOs to go out there and do it. Just be prepared for that part of it. This isn't. I think what we got is a good foundation to work on. It's something we can work with. It's just a matter of funding, and that's what we have to be prepared for. It's going to be a challenging budget.
I got mine.
I know you do, and I hear it bi-weekly. But my opinion is that we just need to be prepared for the cost. Just get your mind wrapped around that, and I think, like I said, I think this is good. I think it can reduce the incidents that we have. It does give the proper authority to pick up the dogs legally, but you know, we just need to understand that 72 hours, what that means in there too. That's just not 72 hours, and then you got to lean at 72 hours, and then the animal gets put down. So that's a bigger concern when we're picking up pets. But I do like the microchipping idea because it does give us an avenue to get back to the owner. But that's all I've got, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Dr. Johnson, then Ms.
Yes, sir.
Ward.
Mr. Chairman, I wish to make a motion that will be a first step in handling our problem. My motion is I move that the staff positions in animal control that were cut be restored immediately under the direction of Michelle Whaley in order that she and her staff may promptly respond to cases where there are misbehaving dogs. That's my
I
motion.
second the motion.
Any discussion?
I'm concerned about that motion because I think that the recommendation on page 54 is really what we need to be focusing on. I think that as far as the activity of this board, it was a question was raised. You know, what has this board done as a result of the concern that has been raised by our citizens? I think we've done a lot. In fact, we've listened to this. We've talked about it, and I think that we are much closer than we have ever been as a board to appropriately fund our animal control to make sure that our citizens are protected. I know that I am, and I think the rest of this board is too. But I still believe that we need to move at a deliberate, studied schedule here, and I think that we need to follow this recommendation that's on page 54 and refer this to our Animal Control Advisory Board so that they can thoroughly study the whole picture of what we need to be doing to protect our citizens from uncontrolled animals, so that we will be able to understand what the cost is and put it in our budget. Now some may look at this as being further delaying, but you know, we're only talking about 90 days here because we've got to have a budget approved by June the 1st. So again, I think we need to thoroughly study it, thoroughly look at all the issues, have those experts that we have appointed, the Animal Control Advisory Board, to look at all of these ordinances, because on a long-term basis, I do think we ought to combine them all. And then come back to us with the recommendations that will include the cost, the capital cost and the operating costs, so that we can appropriately incorporate this in our budget and do this in an orderly fashion.
Still on discussion, Dr. Johnson.
Yes.
Tom.
I want to clarify here, this motion that I'm making does not speak to the total picture. My attempt is to at least make a step in the right direction. I have talked to Michelle Whaley and her staff, and they need some assistance, and they are prepared to handle misbehaving dogs. And I think those people who are prepared to handle misbehaving dogs should be put in charge of it.
Ms. Ward, and then Tom, you were next.
I support what Commissioner Gary said in the sense that we usually do not make budget decisions. I know we probably have in the past, but I know we do not do it very often, to make a decision about buying or inserting 2 new positions until budget time, and I know we have put that off in the future. Was prepared to make a motion that we do this ordinance and refer it, that we support this ordinance being referred to the Animal Advisory Board for their consideration to add things, to take away things. I'm in complete support of the requiring the microchipping. I would hope that the advisory board would look at that and be able to manipulate that in some way. My first thought was that when a dog gets vaccinated, which is required by law, that we also state that they be microchipped at the time at the owner's expense. And I would also like for the Animal Advisory Board to look at the voice command based on some information that either Ms. Overton or you would, share with them as to how that would be best done. So I can make that as a substitute motion now, if that's appropriate, or not.
You've got the floor.
Yes, sir, I'd like to do that.
My
My
motion
motion is that we refer this, as we've said, and I want to thank the staff for doing exactly what we have said. And I don't know any ordinance that we have passed or looked at and that was done as quickly and with a lot of study and forethought as this has been. So I think we're moving at a rapid pace.
I'll second that.
All right. We've got a substitute motion made and seconded. Now we're discussing the substitute motion.
Okay, if I could. You know, one of the things that in the Scott's presentation here is he didn't want to have the stuff brought before or pass an adoption prior to the workshop, budget workshop. I disagree with that for one reason, and I'll show you how this relates to what I just seconded. There'll be no pressure on us to actually do something if we don't put some kind of number figure out there or something for us to consider at workshop. So at the workshop, we won't necessarily have all the data to be able to, well, we may have the data, but May is kind of late. If you remember the last meeting, one of the things I had brought was that I wanted all this to come early on so that we wouldn't say, well, it's too late, you know. And in fact, if I read the paper right this morning, one of the interpretations is now it's too early for us to do something. Well, it's too early, too late. Can't have it both ways. But so therefore, I think we really need to pass something, but not today. I mean, I don't think today's the time, because I believe the Animal Control Advisory Board does need to be given a chance to review this. I also believe that we ought to make an overt effort to let Billy and Beth Sanchez, since they have spent so much time and effort on this, to solicit their input as well. Because after all, they got 1,000 petitions they've signed. They've talked to hundreds of county residents, and if you want to look at it either directly or indirectly, they have reached thousands of people. And so I think that they are a voice that we ought to hear as well. And so in order to do what Tom is saying, the problem still lies that there's no ordinance for them to do anything other than what they're already doing. So we could put 100 people out there, and it won't help anything at this stage until actually we pass something. And one of the things that I was a little bit troubled with the presentation by staff was that the county has no readily available data to either agree or disagree with, and that was stated earlier. My problem is what was inflated? There was an assumption here that the data was inflated. I'd like to remind the board that this data was our information that we, the county, did not tabulate. And at the next Animal Control Advisory Board, I'm going to make a recommendation, we'll see how they respond to it, that the animal control staff on a monthly basis bring all the statistics forward and henceforth continue to compile this database such that we have the information at any given time. And then therefore we'll be able to see whether any ordinance that we pass has been successful in reducing dog bites or not. But I don't want to see them thrown into, like we did from 2002 up through now, thrown into totes.
Tom, let's restrict it to your substitute
Well,
motion,
okay,
but do this, let me make
it's
one
related to
reference
that,
to you.
because I really believe the Animal Control Advisory Board has a lot of responsibilities on it, but they
Well,
need
this
to bring
will
something
get it back to it.
But they need to bring it
along the
before
line of time frame, why don't you and Beth consider in your motion giving the board a time frame to bring it back to you?
Well, I would think that we would like to have the Animal Control Advisory
That's what
Board
I mean.
report in April, not May.
Well, that's my point.
Okay.
Oh, that was why I said that it would be, that I figured that they would bring it forward as soon as possible, and I considered that the staff brought this together in 2 weeks, so I would assume that it would come to us certainly by our first meeting in April.
If I can interject.
I think that would be
Staff has
feasible.
some.
I don't see any of that.
Staff has some preliminary numbers we'd be happy to share with Animal Control Advisory Board. And if you directed, say, bring it back in 30 days, there could be a called Animal Control Advisory Board meeting or meetings to address this, and we'll try to get back on here even prior to budget workshops, if that's the board's desire.
Well, I think that's the
Well, I
point, is
think
to
that
get it prior.
I would like for the goal to be at our meeting in April, and I'll be glad to.
Everybody got
increase
what the
that.
motion,
I agree with that.
Mr. Hammond, I believe you're next.
I was asking a question, Mr. Chairman. Mr. James and all of us have been talking in relative to Pitt County, but I've had a true experience with one of my grandchildren's friend was bidding at a washerette in town, and the dog's tag was from Vance County, which is in Henderson, North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Hammond. Any further discussion? Mr. McLaughlin?
I just want to mention that the Sanchez, could they be included in your motion to Ms. Ward, so that any maybe recommendation from them in terms of expediting this matter? I think April certainly will be a good timeline. I was just reading an article in the paper, Sunday's paper, where a vicious dog bitten a young man, and of course found out it didn't have rabies. But I think the importance of this is to move as cautiously, but as expeditiously as possible. So I'm wondering, and I would like to just see the Sanchez at least be a part of this in terms of making this as a movement.
I would be willing to have that. I think that our Animal Advisory Board, that is my motion. And I would not mind saying that they could invite the Sanchez's forward, that they could ask them questions and that kind of thing and take, but not a full presentation again of, what we have heard in the past.
Well, that point's well taken, and if those materials that have been presented by Beth and her husband have not, we've had 3 or 4 dispositions and record and that material, none of that's been disputed. So we've got that all within this confine. But are we ready to vote on the substitute motion?
Yes.
All right, ready to vote? All right, next order of business.
I want to say this.
Yes, sir, Mr.
Because I was going to come back to you. I, as a county commissioner and a citizens of Pitt County, I want Beth Sanchez to be on that animal control board. I'm telling you, the work that she has done, the people that she has contacted, she represents these people. And she needs to be on that board. Otherwise, you're gonna have some more, we're gonna have more problems than you think we're gonna have. Because I know I'm out there with her.
All right. Shepherd Memorial Library.
I would like to recommend the acceptance of the reappointment of Jesse J. Hinton and Vivian Mott.
Any others? If not, let's vote. All right, Mr. James, you look at number 5? Tom?
Well, okay, Eugene just brought it up. So Beth, you're sitting here. Do you want to serve on the Animal Control Advisory Board?
You can nominate her until she's applied.
I know, I understand that. Is that something you would like to sit on the Animal Control Advisory Board? I'm catching you cold right now, and you haven't got an application in, but is that something you would like to do? Yes, long-term. Long-term, it's 2-year commitment.
3 year.
3 year.
3 year, I'm sorry.
3 year.
Okay. Then what I would suggest that you do is put an application in, Beth. But in the meantime, there's a reappointment opportunity right now. Don Skinner. What I'd like to do is nominate Don Skinner to be reappointed. He's been a valuable member of the board.
I second that, if it's supposed to be seconded.
Well, are there any other?
Yes, I nominate Beth Sanchez to be on the board.
I think what Mr. Colson was saying, but since Beth is
All
not
right,
permitted.
all right, I'm nominating her then, at the same time he's nominating this one, so we'll have a choice.
Get the attorney.
She needs to be on that board. That's the only thing I can say was an additional one
Don't
time.
disagree at all.
That's right, I'm telling you.
I don't disagree, but we do have an application process. And I don't know that we've ever set a precedence where we've bypassed that. And that's why I was encouraging Beth, if she has an interest, to go ahead and apply. We do have regular people that drop off, or there are times.
What's your?
I just wanted to say that because of your rule that requires an application on file for 15 days, you would either need to also move to suspend that rule, or what you've done in the past is postponed consideration of the appointment until the application has been on file for the requisite period of time. Although that could be a very separate issue, if I'm hearing you correctly, that today you have a reappointment of somebody currently serving on the board who wants to do an additional three-year term. You can address that today and then allow her to file an application for the next possible opening, or you can postpone consideration of the entire matter today.
If I could comment on that, since I sit as a member on that board, is there anything that would prevent, number one, I don't want to suspend anything for a vote now. I don't think that's a good precedent to set. Beth would be an absolutely wonderful member on that board, and I've encouraged her to do a lot of things, in the political arena, and she's been a little bit hesitant. Is there anything that would prevent us from adding an additional member to the Animal Control Advisory Board once her application went on file?
You have an adopted, I believe it's in your meeting minutes, that sets out the structure of your Animal Control Advisory Board, and it lists each position and the attributes associated with those positions. They've been modified at one point to make them at-large positions, as opposed to, because the positions with the attributes could not in the past be filled with folks with the required attributes. And so so I know it's been changed once in the past. It could be changed again, but I would ask that you not do that necessarily at this meeting until what your current process is before the board. You have an opportunity to see that and then make a purposeful decision as to how you might like to change it. But the answer to your question is yes, you could change the structure of that board, but I would caution you not to do that now. I'd advise that you do that after you've studied
In hearing what Janice has said, my motion still stands that we adopt, or that we reappoint Don Skinner, and that we look at what we can do to add a member to the Animal Control Advisory Board at a later time. Beth, I would still encourage you to put your
During that
application in.
discussion, Mr. James placed
Yeah.
another name before this.
I will support his.
Do you want to withdraw your?
I withdraw mine, but
All right, let's vote on the one person then,
Yeah, I'm
correct?
still
All right.
encouraging this board to do what I'm
Mr.
telling you.
Chairman,
Let's vote yes, Dave.
don't those individuals have to come by Milner's office and fill out an intent to serve or leave their name on record? as
That's
being a
exactly right,
person?
Mr. Hammond. We're in the process of doing that.
All right, thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
sir. All right, you ready to vote?
Yes.
Eugene? All right, thank you. Now we go to number 6. What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to place the name Andrea Neal as recommended by the committee.
Any other names?
Or the board.
If not, let's vote. I believe someone's requested a 2.5-minute break.
Yeah, good.
I want 5.
Thank y'all.
1,000.
Thank you, we are now back in open session. What's the pleasure of the board at this time?
Motion to go into closed session.
Second.
All right.
And if I may state your grounds, it has been suggested,
Please. Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman, that this board go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318.11A1 to prevent the disclosure of confidential information, A3 under attorney-client privilege, A4 to discuss matters related to economic development, A5 to discuss matters related to acquisition of property, and 6 under personnel to consider the qualification, competence, performance, character, and fitness of a county employee.
All right. Everybody vote?
Oh.
Thank y'all. We'll be back shortly. Thank you. We are now back in open session. Mr. Garris, have you got something you want to tell us?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion that we extend the option on the county property adjacent to this building for 90 days.
All right.
Second.
All right, any discussion? If not, let's vote. Thank you, Mr. Garris. Mr. Webb?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would make a motion that we approve the minutes from our February 17th closed session meeting as to the content only.
Second.
All right, let's vote. Ms. Ward?
I would like to make a motion to approve a change to the appointed position of clerk to the board from a grade of 71 increment 5 to increment 15.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Not, let's vote. All right, Commissioners' comments. Mr. Hammond?
No comment.
Mr. James? No comment. Mr. Colson?
None.
Ms. Ward?
No.
Mr. Webb?
No, sir.
Dr. Johnson?
No comment.
Mr. McLaughlin? Mr.
Mr.
Garrett?
Chairman, I do have one comment. As each of us are aware, the landscape of downtown Greenville has improved by the big federal courthouse building. And I was talking to the Chief Judge, Randy Daub, and he is going to invite all of us, including staff, Scott, to go down and take a tour of that facility, and I will be getting with him this week to establish that date and time, and I will have our clerk to notify each of you as to when we will set that up and invite. He was very, he's very proud of that facility, and he wants to show it off to each of us. So
Very well deserved, because Randy has done a magnificent
Yes, he
job
has.
in his efforts with that.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett.
Yes.
If no further questions, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Thank you.
Yes, it is.